Once upon a time there lived a girl named Blessing. She was known all over the land for her beauty. Her skin glowed like the sun and her hair flowed like a river. Everyone who saw her admired her, but Blessing had a big problem. She was very proud. She always looked down on people, believing she was better than them just because her father was a chief. She never greeted anyone, and if you dared speak to her she would insult you. One bright afternoon, Blessing was walking down the road with her head held high, wearing her finest clothes. As she passed, people looked at her in awe, but she didn't care. She thought they were all beneath her. She walked proudly, ignoring everyone, until she met an old woman sitting by the side of the road. The old woman was dressed in tattered clothes and looked weak. Her back was bent and her hands shook as she stretched them out to Blessing. "My child," the old woman called out, "please can you spare some money? I haven't eaten for days." Blessing stopped and looked at the old woman with disgust. "Who do you think you are, asking me for money?" she snapped. "Look at you. What did you do with your youth? Didn't you know you'd get old one day? Now you want me to give you money? You must be joking." The old woman's eyes filled with sadness, but she remained calm. "Life was hard for me, my child," she explained softly. "Not everyone has the same opportunities." Blessing laughed mockingly. "That's your problem, not mine. Next time use your youth wisely, old woman, and don't come begging from someone as important as me." Little did Blessing know this was not an ordinary old woman. She was a witch who had the power to teach people important lessons. The old woman smiled to herself, shaking her head at the girl's arrogance. The old woman whispered some words under her breath, and a gust of wind blew through the trees. Her voice grew sharp and she spoke a curse that chilled the air. "From this day onward," she said, her eyes glowing with power, "you Blessing, you will sleep with any man you come across. You will lose all control over yourself and you will bring shame to your family. This will be your punishment for your pride and arrogance." Blessing gasped in fear, but before she could respond, the old woman vanished, leaving only the wind and silence behind. At first Blessing didn't believe it. She thought the woman was just trying to scare her, but soon did the curse took hold. Whenever she walked past any man in the village, something inside her changed. She would find herself drawn to them, unable to resist, and before she knew it, she would be with them in ways she couldn't explain. It was like a force took over her body, making her do things she didn't want to do. Words quickly spread through the village. People whispered behind her back, and soon her parents heard the rumors. They were deeply ashamed of their daughter. The chief, Blessing's father, couldn't show his face in the village anymore. People started mocking them, saying that the chief's daughter was a disgrace. In desperation, Blessing's parents made a plan. They decided to send her far away to the city to stay with Victor, an old best friend of her father. They thought that by moving her away, the shame would leave with her. They did not tell Victor or his family about the real reason they were sending. They simply said she needed to stay with them for a while to help her focus on school and learn city life. Blessing arrived in the city, hoping that her life would change for the better. Victor and his wife welcomed her warmly into their home, but little did Blessing know that her troubles were far from over. The curse followed her like a shadow. Victor, though he had been her father's best friend, soon became a different man when his wife wasn't around. One evening, while his wife was out visiting a friend, Victor approached Blessing. His eyes lingered on her, and without warning, he began to take advantage of her. Blessing tried to resist, but the curse took hold, and once again, she found herself powerless. It didn't stop there. Every time Victor's wife left the house, he would find a way to be with Blessing. She was filled with shame and confusion, but the curse made her unable to escape the situation. She was trapped, caught in a life she didn't want. Paul's son, who was only a few years older than Blessing, noticed what was happening. He started making advances toward her too. The curse made it impossible for her to resist, and soon found herself with both the father and the son. The household that was supposed to give her peace and safety had become a prison of shame and pain. Blessing's days became a nightmare. She dreaded being alone in the house with Paul and his son. She longed for freedom, for a way to break the curse, but she didn't know how. She couldn't tell anyone who would believe her, and even if they did, they would only see her as a girl who brought shame wherever she went. Victor's wife began to notice that something was wrong. She would often come home to find Blessing distant, her eyes filled with sadness, and she wondered if something had happened to her, but Blessing stayed silent, too afraid to speak the truth. What could she say? That she was cursed by an old woman in the village, or that her father's best friend and his son were taking advantage of her? Who would believe such a story? And so Blessing remained trapped, caught between the curse and the shame, with no escape in sight. One day Blessing and her father's best friend Victor were alone in the house. The worst happened. Victor had sent his wife out on an errand, leaving him and Blessing alone. Once again Blessing tried to stay away from him, but the curse still controlled. They were together when suddenly Victor gasped for breath. His face turned pale, and before Blessing could understand what was happening, he collapsed on the floor lifeless. Blessing screamed in panic. She didn't know what to do. She rushed to him, shaking him, calling his name, but Victor was gone. Victor's wife came home shortly after and found her husband lying on the floor with Blessing standing beside him, terrified. She screamed and called for help, and soon the house was filled with neighbors, all whispering and pointing fingers at Blessing. Rumors spread quickly, and before long, the police arrived. Victor's wife was furious. She blamed Blessing for her husband's death, saying that she had killed him. Victor's son, who knew what had been happening between his father and Blessing, backed his mother. Together they made sure Blessing would pay for Victor's death. They told the police that Blessing had been seducing both the father and the son, that she had caused Victor's death, and that she needed to be punished. Blessing tried to explain, but no one listened. Her father came to the city and did everything he could to prove his daughter's innocence. He hired lawyers, spoke to the police, and pleaded with the court, but the case was too strong against her. The whispers about Blessing's behavior in the village, the rumors about her with different men, and now the death of Victor all made her look guilty in the eyes of the law. After months of trial, the judge finally gave his verdict. Blessing was sentenced to 10 years in prison for Victor's death. Her parents were devastated. Her father, the chief, had never imagined his beautiful daughter would end up in such a situation. Her mother cried every day, unable to believe what had happened to their family. Back in the village, the people who Blessing had once insulted were happy. The girls she had always looked down on, the ones she had called less beautiful than her, whispered and laughed, "She deserves it." They said this is what happens to people who think they are better than everyone else. Blessing was taken to prison, and her life became even harder. The curse still controlled her even in the prison. She found herself unable to resist. She began sleeping with the other prisoners, some of whom took advantage of her, knowing she couldn't stop them. The corrupt officers in the prison also noticed Blessing's weakness and started using her for their own desires whenever they got the chance. Blessing felt trapped more than ever before. She was locked in a prison cell, but it was the curse that made her feel even more imprisoned every day. She prayed for the curse to be lifted. She thought about her past, how she had insulted the old woman, how she had looked down on everyone, and how her arrogance had led her to this terrible fate. She regretted every single moment of her pride and wished she could go back in time to make things right. But as time went on, Blessing realized there was no going back. She was stuck in prison, and her parents were far away, heartbroken. They visited her sometimes, but every visit was filled with tears. Her father, the chief, grew weaker with every passing year, unable to bear the shame that had fallen on his family. Her mother was always quiet, her eyes filled with sadness. The people in the village continued to talk about Blessing's fall from grace. She had once been the most beautiful girl, the one everyone admired. Now she was known as the girl who brought shame to her family, the girl who ended up in prison for a crime she didn't fully understand. But the curse didn't care about what she understood, it only cared about punishing her. As the years passed in prison, Blessing began to lose hope. She wondered if she would ever be free, not just from the prison walls but from the curse that controlled her life. After 5 long years in prison, a glimmer of hope finally came for a Blessing. A kind-hearted lawyer heard about her case. He was curious and felt pity for the young girl whose life had been ruined. The lawyer began investigating the circumstances around Victor's death. It didn't take long for him to discover the truth. Victor, who had hypertension, had secretly taken hard drugs to satisfy Blessing in bed. His weak heart couldn't handle the medication, which caused him to collapse and die that fateful day. Armed with this new information, the lawyer brought it to court, and after a thorough review, Blessing was declared innocent. She had been blamed for something that was not her fault, even though she had served 5 years in prison. She was finally free, but freedom didn't feel as sweet as she had hoped. The shame of everything that had happened weighed heavily on her. Blessing couldn't bear the thought of going back to the village. She remembered how she had insulted and looked down on so many people. She knew that if she returned, they would mock her. She was too ashamed to face the villagers, especially the girls she had once called ugly and beneath her. Seeing her deep sadness, the lawyer who had freed her felt sorry for her. He offered to take Blessing in, allowing her to live in his home. Blessing accepted his kind offer, grateful for a fresh start. For the first 2 weeks everything seemed fine. Blessing felt a sense of peace for the first time in years. She thought maybe things would finally change for the better, but the curse was still alive inside her, controlling her every move. Soon Blessing found herself sleeping with the neighbors whenever the lawyer went to work. She couldn't control it. The curse pulled her into situations she never wanted to be in. The neighbors started talking and rumors spread quickly. People whispered about her, saying how strange it was for her to be with so many men. Eventually the neighbors approached the lawyer and told him what was going on. The lawyer was shocked. He couldn't believe it. He confronted Blessing, heartbroken that this was happening. Blessing cried and begged him for forgiveness, promising that she would change. She explained that she couldn't control herself, that something was wrong. The lawyer listened patiently and decided to give her another chance. He told her that she had to try harder to resist, but just a day later, the lawyer caught Blessing with his security man. The lawyer was furious. He had trusted her, but now he felt like he couldn't help her anymore. As if that wasn't enough, a few days later Blessing was caught with the neighbor's husband. The wife found out, and though Blessing begged for forgiveness, it was clear that the situation was spiraling out of control. Blessing's actions had caused so much trouble. She had already slept with most of the men in the lawyer's estate, and it became impossible for the lawyer to ignore the problem any longer. He felt torn between pity and frustration. He wanted to help her, but it seemed like nothing could stop her from falling deeper into the curse. In the end, the lawyer made a difficult decision. He couldn't allow Blessing to stay in his house anymore. Her actions had caused too much damage. With a heavy heart, the lawyer asked Blessing to leave his home. She had no choice but to pack her things and go. She had nowhere else to turn, so she returned to the village, even though the thought of it made her feel sick with shame. As soon as she arrived, the mocking began. The villagers remembered how she had once insulted them, and now they saw her as a fallen woman. They ridiculed her, calling her names, pointing fingers and laughing at her. Whenever she passed by, the girls she had once looked down upon were the loudest, saying things like, "Where's your beauty now, Blessing?" Blessing couldn't take the humiliation. She locked herself in her room, crying day and night. Her parents were devastated, seeing their once proud daughter reduced to tears and shame. They tried everything to help her, but nothing worked. They even attempted to locate the old woman who had cursed Blessing, hoping that maybe, just maybe, the curse could be lifted, but no matter how hard they searched, the old woman was nowhere to be found. Blessing's life had become a nightmare. She was trapped by a curse she didn't understand, a punishment that seemed never-ending. Every day, she thought about how her pride had led her to this point, and she regretted every moment. She wished she had shown kindness to the old woman that day on the road. She hadn't let her arrogance get the best of her. Blessing's life took a turn one day when a prince from the city visited the village. Prince Benjamin was a handsome young man loved by everyone in the village because of his kind heart. The moment he laid eyes on Blessing, something stirred in him. Despite everything people said about her, despite the rumors of her past and the shame she had brought upon herself, Prince Benjamin saw something different. He was drawn to her beauty, and then was a softness in her eyes that made him want to know more. Blessing, however, was still carrying the weight of her past. She felt lost. But when Prince Benjamin started showing interest in her, a part of her began to hope again. Could this be her chance for a fresh start? Could the prince be the one to lift her out of the misery she had been living in? The prince's parents, the king and queen, warned him about Blessing. They had heard the stories, the curse, the shame, and the trouble that seemed to follow her wherever she went, but Prince Benjamin didn't care. He told his parents that he liked Blessing and that he didn't mind her past. He believed she deserved a second chance, so despite the warnings, he invited Blessing to the palace. Blessing was nervous but hopeful. Maybe this was the beginning of a new life for her. Maybe the prince could help her break free from the curse. But on the very first day she arrived at the palace, something terrible happened that night. Unable to control herself, Blessing slept with the king. She had no intention of doing it, but the curse once again took over, making her act against her will. When the prince found out, he was heartbroken. He had truly liked Blessing, but now, after what had happened with his father, he felt betrayed. He distanced himself from her, leaving Blessing feeling more alone and devastated than ever. She couldn't believe what had happened. The one person who had shown her kindness, who had seen past her mistakes, was now gone. Blessing returned home filled with shame and regret. She was so overwhelmed by her emotions that she told her mother she couldn't go on like this anymore. She felt as though her life had no meaning, and the thought of ending it crossed her mind. Her mother, heartbroken, begged her not to give up. She reminded Blessing that there had to be a way out, that there had to be some hope left. Blessing thought long and hard. She remembered hearing about a man of God who lived not too far from their village. He was known for his wisdom and for helping people who were lost with nothing. Blessing decided to visit him. The man of God welcomed her into his home and listened patiently as Blessing told her story. She poured out her heart, sharing everything about the curse, the shame, and the mistakes. she had made the man of God looked at her kindly and told her something that would change her life. He said that the old woman who had cursed her had long passed away, and while she couldn't break the curse directly, there was a way for Blessing to be free. He told her that the only way to break the curse was to surrender her life to God. He explained that only by giving her heart fully to God, she could find peace and be released from the evil that had been controlling her. Blessing had never thought about this before, but as she listened to the man of God, something in her heart began to stir. With tears streaming down her face, Blessing knelt down and prayed, giving her life to God for the first time in years. She felt a sense of peace wash over her. It was as if a heavy weight had been lifted from her shoulders. The curse that had followed her for so long began to fade, and for the first time she felt free. As time passed, Blessing's life slowly began to change. She stayed close to the man of God, praying and learning more about how to live a good and honest life. The villagers who had once mocked her noticed the change in her. She was no longer the same person who had caused so much shame and trouble. She was kind, humble, and filled with a new sense of purpose. A few years later, something wonderful happened. Blessing met a wealthy young man who fell deeply in love with her. He saw the newer Blessing, the one who had turned her life around. He didn't care about her past. All he saw was the beautiful, kind-hearted woman she had become. The two of them got married in a joyful celebration, and soon after, they had children together. Blessing's life, which had once been filled with shame and despair, became a story of hope and redemption. She and her family lived happily, and Blessing never forgot the lessons she had learned. She became a role model in the village, sharing her story with young girls to remind them that no matter how far someone may fall, they can always rise again with the right choices and a heart open to change. And so Blessing's story ended not in shame but in happiness, surrounded by the love of her family and the peace she had finally found. Dear viewers, what lessons did you take away from this dramatic tale? We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed the story, give us a thumbs up, share it with friends, and hit that subscribe button. Don't forget to turn on notifications so you never miss out on our latest updates. Thanks for watching and stay blessed.